The night guard at the Mannequin factory, a symphony of shifting plastic. The first thing Marcus Chen noticed wasn't the blood on the factory floor, it was the mannequin that had moved. He'd been making his rounds through Whitmore & Associates Mannequin manufacturing the beam of his flashlight, cutting through the darkness of the assembly line when he saw her. The blonde mannequin with the red dress, the one he'd nicknamed Scarlet, during his first week on the job. She'd been facing the wall when he'd passed by 20 minutes ago. Now she was turned toward the aisle, her glassy eyes seeming to track his movement. Marcus froze his hand instinctively, moving to the radio on his belt. Then he laughed at himself, a nervous sound that echoed off the high ceiling. Of course she'd moved. The day shift must have repositioned her before leaving. That's what he told himself as he continued his patrol, though he couldn't shake the feeling that those painted eyes were still watching him. It wasn't until he reached the quality control section that he found the blood, a dark pool of it spreading beneath a toppled mannequin torso. The overhead lights flickered on as the motion sensors detected him, revealing a scene that made his stomach lurch. The torso wasn't just toppled, it was shattered, as if something had crushed it with tremendous force. And the blood. There was too much blood for this to be a simple workplace accident. Marcus grabbed his radio. "Central, this is Unit 7 at Whitmore Factory. I need police and paramedics at..." The lights went out. Not just the motion-activated overheads, but every light in the building. Even the red exit signs blinked into darkness. The only illumination came from his flashlight, its beam suddenly feeling pathetically small against the vast blackness of the factory floor. Then he heard it, a sound like plastic scraping against concrete. Slow, deliberate, coming from multiple directions at once. Marcus had been a night guard for 3 years. He'd dealt with break-ins, vandalism, even a fire once. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what happened next. In the wandering beam of his flashlight, every mannequin in sight had turned to face him. Hundreds of them, their frozen smiles gleaming in the darkness. And somewhere in that sea of plastic faces, something was moving toward him, something that breathed. Chapter 1. The New Assignment. 6 weeks earlier, the Whitmore & Associates Mannequin manufacturing facility sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, Indiana, a sprawling complex of connected buildings that looked more like a small city than a factory. Marcus Chen pulled his beat-up Honda Civic into the employee parking lot, checking his watch. 10:47 p.m. He was early for his first shift, which was exactly how he liked it. The factory's main building loomed before him, all concrete and steel, with rows of dark windows that reflected the orange glow of the parking lot lights. A massive sign proclaimed, "Whitmore & Associates, bringing life to retail since 1952. In letters that had probably been white once, but had faded to a sickly yellow. Marcus grabbed his new uniform from the passenger seat, navy blue with "Security" emblazoned across the back, and his training manual, which was thick enough to be used as a weapon. He'd spent the last week memorizing patrol routes, emergency procedures, and the labyrinthine layout of the facility. On paper, it seemed like a straightforward gig. Better pay than his last job at the mall, better hours, and according to his supervisor, absolutely nothing ever happened at a mannequin factory. Easiest money you'll ever make, his new boss Raymond Kruger had said during the interview. Just walk around, check doors, and make sure the homeless don't break in to sleep. Most exciting thing that's happened in 5 years was when a pigeon got stuck in the ventilation system. The security office was located just inside the main entrance, a small room with banks of monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the facility. Raymond was there waiting for him, a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a graying mustache and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "Chen, good. You're early." Raymond gestured to a younger man sitting at the monitor desk. "This is Diego Vasquez. He's been working the night shift for about a year now. He'll show you the ropes tonight." Diego stood and offered his hand. He was in his late 20s, with an easy smile and the kind of relaxed posture that came from working a job where nothing ever happened. "Welcome to the graveyard shift, man. Hope you brought a book. Or a tablet," Raymond added. "Just keep it discreet. Corporate doesn't like to think they're paying us to watch Netflix, even though that's basically what the job is. Long as you do your rounds every hour and log them properly, nobody cares." Marcus nodded, trying to reconcile this casual attitude with the thick training manual he'd been studying. The manual made it seem more intensive. Diego laughed. That's corporate for you. They make it sound like we're guarding Fort Knox. Truth is, who's going to steal a mannequin? They're creepy as hell and worth maybe $50 each. Creepy is right, Raymond muttered. Especially in Zone C. That's where they keep the vintage ones. Some of those things are from the 60s. Glass eyes, real hair. Nightmare fuel, if you ask me. You get used to them, Diego said, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. Come on, I'll show you around. First rule of night shift, learn where all the light switches are. Place gets dark as hell when the motion sensors time out. They left Raymond in the security office and began the tour. The facility was even larger than Marcus had imagined. The main manufacturing floor was the size of several football fields, with assembly lines where mannequins were constructed from fiberglass and plastic components. During the day shift, Diego explained over 200 workers operated the machinery-painted faces, attached limbs, and styled synthetic hair. Now in the darkness, the partially assembled figures looked like victims of some terrible accident, limbless torsos and bodiless heads arranged in neat rows. This is Zone A, Diego said, his voice echoing in the vast space. Active manufacturing. You'll walk through here every hour just checking for leaks, unusual sounds, making sure none of the machines decided to turn themselves on. That happens sometimes. Old wiring. They moved through a set of double doors into Zone B, the finishing area. Here, completed mannequins stood in various poses, waiting to be dressed in sample clothing before being photographed for catalogues. The overhead lights flickered on as they entered, revealing hundreds of figures in various states of dress. Men in business suits, women in sundresses, children in school uniforms. All frozen in positions meant to convey life and movement, but achieving only an uncanny stillness. Gets easier after the first few nights, Diego said, noticing Marcus's discomfort. You learn not to look at their faces, just focus on checking the doors and windows. Zone C was in a separate building connected by a covered walkway. As they approached, Diego's casual demeanor shifted slightly. He walked a bit faster, kept his flashlight beam moving constantly. So this is the vintage section Raymond mentioned, Marcus asked. Yeah, storage mostly. They keep the old models here, special orders, custom work. Some real weird stuff. Diego unlocked the door with a key card. Company's been around since the 50s. The founder, Arthur Whitmore, he was obsessed with making them as lifelike as possible. Used to import glass eyes from Germany, real human hair from India. There are rumors he tried even stranger things, but that's probably just night shift gossip. The door opened into a corridor lined with storage rooms. Through the small windows in each door, Marcus could see mannequins of a decidedly different character than the modern ones. These had a weight to them, a presence that the contemporary fiberglass models lacked. Their faces were more detailed, with individual eyelashes and subtle expressions that seemed to shift in the moving flashlight beams. Room C19 is the worst, Diego said, pointing to a door at the end of the hall. That's where they keep the prototypes, Whitmore's personal projects. I only go in there if I absolutely have to. What's so bad about it? Diego hesitated. You know how I said you get used to them. That's true for most of the factory. But C19, I've been here a year and those things still freak me out. They're too real. And sometimes, he trailed off, shaking his head. Night shift makes you paranoid. You'll see. They completed the tour, covering the shipping areas, the executive offices, and the various entry points that needed to be checked. By the time they returned to the security office, it was nearly 1 a.m. Raymond was packing up his things. Diego will take the desk tonight, he told Marcus. You just focus on learning the routes. Radio check every hour, patrol every hour on the half. Log anything unusual, even if it seems stupid. Better to have too much information than not enough. After Raymond left, Diego showed Marcus how to use the logging system and walked him through the camera controls. There were over 100 cameras throughout the facility, though only about half were monitored actively. The rest recorded to hard drives that were reviewed only if there was an incident. Here's the real first rule, Diego said once they were alone. The cameras in Zone C, half of them don't work. Been that way since before I started. Company keeps saying they'll fix them, but... He shrugged. just means you actually have to walk those sections instead of checking from here. Marcus's first patrol was uneventful. He followed the route Diego had shown him, checking doors, scanning his keycard at the designated checkpoints, trying to ignore the sensation of being watched by thousands of glass and plastic eyes. The factory had its own rhythm at night, the hum of ventilation systems, the occasional creak of settling metal, the distant buzz of security lights. By his third patrol, he was beginning to relax. It was during his fourth patrol, around 4:30 a.m., that he first noticed something odd. He was in Zone B, making his way through the formal wear section, when his flashlight beam caught movement. He spun toward it, hand moving instinctively to the pepper spray on his belt, only to find himself facing a mannequin in a wedding dress. Nothing had moved. Of course nothing had moved. But he could have sworn. Marcus stepped closer, examining the figure. It was positioned on a small platform, arms gracefully extended, head tilted slightly, as if listening to music only it could hear. The dress was elaborate, covered in lace and tiny pearls that caught the light. And its face. Most of the modern mannequins had deliberately anonymous features designed to let customers project themselves onto the figure. But this one was different. This one had a face that was almost but not quite human. The kind of face that would be beautiful if it could move, but was deeply unsettling in its stillness. A small placard at the base read, "Whitmore Classic Collection, Bride, 1967. One of the vintage models. What was it doing in Zone B with the contemporary figures? Marcus made a note in his log and continued his patrol. By the time he returned to the security office, Diego was deep into a game on his phone. Find anything interesting? Diego asked without looking up. There's a vintage mannequin in Zone B, the Bride. Diego's thumbs stopped moving. He looked up, frowning. In Zone B, you sure? Yeah, in the formal wear section. The placard said 1967. That's weird. Diego set down his phone and pulled up the camera for that section. The image was grainy in the low light, but they could make out the wedding dress figure. I didn't see anyone moving stuff yesterday. Did you check the work orders? Marcus shook his head. Diego typed something into the computer, pulling up the maintenance and movement logs. Nothing scheduled, he said. Maybe day shift moved it and forgot to log it. Happens sometimes. But he didn't sound convinced. Which section exactly? Row 15 near the evening wear. Diego made a note. I'll ask around tomorrow. Probably nothing but those vintage ones are worth a lot more than the regular models. Company gets touchy about them being moved without authorization. The rest of the shift passed without incident. As dawn light began to filter through the high windows, Marcus felt the exhaustion of his first night settling into his bones. Diego showed him how to complete the shift report and where to leave his keys for the day security team. You did good, Diego said as they walked to the parking lot together. Most people get too spooked their first night to finish the whole shift. The mannequins get to them. It's just a job, Marcus said, though he couldn't shake the image of that bride mannequin standing alone among the modern figures. Same time tomorrow. Every night, brother. Welcome to the graveyard shift. As Marcus drove home through the awakening streets of Millbrook, he tried to rationalize the unease that had settled in his stomach. It was just a factory. The mannequins were just plastic and fiberglass, no different from any other manufactured product. The night shift always made things seem stranger than they were, but he couldn't forget what Diego had said about Room C19, about the prototypes that were too real. And he couldn't shake the feeling that when he'd shined his flashlight on that bride mannequin for just a fraction of a second, he'd seen it blink. Chapter 2, The Watchers. Marcus's second week on the job brought a routine that was almost comforting. Arrive at 11 p.m. chat with Diego in the security office, make hourly patrols, try not to think too much about the thousands of unblinking eyes that followed his flashlight beam through the darkness. He'd even started bringing a book, though he found it hard to concentrate with the bank of security monitors flickering in his peripheral vision. It was Thursday night when things began to change. You ever notice how they're never in exactly the same position? Diego asked during their 2 a.m. break. He was staring at one of the monitors showing Zone B absently stirring sugar into his coffee. Marcus looked up from his paperback. What do you mean? The mannequins. Day shift moves them around sometimes, sure. But I mean the little things. An arm that was straight is now slightly bent. A head turned a few degrees. Stuff that could just be vibration from the machinery or whatever, but... He trailed off, still staring at the screen. But what? Diego turned his chair to face Marcus. Okay, this is going to sound crazy, but sometimes I think they move when we're not looking. Not far, just adjustments, like they're getting comfortable. Marcus forced a laugh. Come on, man. You're starting to sound like Raymond with his vintage nightmare fuel talk. Maybe. Diego turned back to the monitors. Or maybe this place just gets to you after a while. You know Whitmore died here. The founder, seriously, 1973. Heart attack in room C19 right in the middle of his workshop. They found him surrounded by his prototypes. The official report said he'd been dead for 3 days, but... Diego lowered his voice, even though they were alone. The security guard who found him quit that same day, wouldn't say why. And every guard who's worked here since has stories. What kind of stories? Before Diego could answer, one of the monitors flickered. The feed from camera 47 in Zone C went to static, then black. Shit, Diego muttered. Not again. Does that happen often? More than it should. The whole system in Zone C is ancient. Company keeps saying they'll upgrade it, but vintage mannequins don't exactly bring in the big bucks anymore. He made a note in the log. You mind checking it on your next patrol? Sometimes just opening and closing the door resets the connection. Marcus agreed, though he wasn't thrilled about venturing into Zone C alone. He'd been avoiding that building on his patrols, sticking to the quick walk-through that was technically required, but not lingering like he did in the other zones. When 2:30 came around, he grabbed his flashlight and headed out. The manufacturing floor was quiet, except for the hum of ventilation and the occasional tick of cooling metal. He made his way through Zone A, quickly scanning his badge at each checkpoint, then through Zone B, where the bride mannequin still stood in her incongruous position among the contemporary models. He'd asked about it during shift change, but no one on the day team claimed to have moved it. The covered walkway to Zone C was lit by flickering fluorescence that created pools of shadow between each fixture. Marcus's footsteps echoed on the concrete, a lonely sound that made him walk faster. He swiped his badge at the entrance and stepped into the vintage storage area. The corridor stretched before him, dimly lit by emergency lighting. The smell here was different from the main building, older mustier, with an undertone of something chemical that he couldn't quite identify. Dust motes danced in his flashlight beam as he made his way past the storage rooms, each window offering glimpses of the figures within. Room C7 held a collection of children's mannequins from the 1960s. Their faces painted with rosy cheeks and bright smiles that looked ghoulish in the harsh LED light. Room C12 was full of male figures in various military uniforms, their postures rigid and formal. Room C15 contained mannequins in vintage swimwear, their poses suggesting a beach scene from a bygone era. Camera 47 was mounted at the far end of the corridor, just before the turn that led to room C19. Marcus could see the device, its red recording light dark. He reached up and tapped it gently. Nothing. The mounting looked secure, the cables intact. Whatever was wrong was likely in the connection box, which would require maintenance to access. He was about to head back when he heard it. A soft sound like fabric rustling. It came from around the corner from the direction of C19. Marcus froze, listening. The sound came again, followed by what might have been a footstep. Soft, careful, as if someone was trying not to be heard. His hand went to his radio. But what would he say? That he heard a noise, Diego would laugh at him. It was probably just the building settling, or a mouse, or any number of harmless things that sounded sinister in the dark. He rounded the corner, flashlight raised. The door to C19 was open, not wide open, just a few inches. Enough to see that the room beyond was completely dark. Marcus knew he'd checked this door on his last patrol. It had been closed and locked, just like always. He approached slowly, aware of his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Through the gap, he could see nothing but blackness. His flashlight beam seemed to be swallowed by it, revealing only the edge of the doorframe and a sliver of concrete floor. "Hello." His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Security. Is someone in there?" Silence. Marcus reached for the door handle, then hesitated. Protocol said he should radio for backup before investigating any potential breach. But what if it was just a malfunctioning lock? He'd looked like an idiot calling Diego over for a mechanical failure. He pushed the door open wider. The smell hit him first. Not unpleasant exactly, but strange, like old flowers mixed with something medicinal. His flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating work tables covered in mannequin parts, shelves lined with heads in various stages of completion. And in the center of the room, Marcus's breath caught. They stood in a perfect circle, 12 mannequins facing inward. Men and women in clothing from different eras, their poses suggesting movement, frozen mid-gesture. One woman's hand was raised as if in greeting. A man in a 1950s suit had his head tilted, mouth slightly open as if speaking. A young girl in a Victorian dress held her arms out, as if asking to be picked up. In the center of the circle was an empty chair, an old wooden thing with arms worn smooth by use. On the seat was a leather journal closed with AW embossed on the cover. Marcus stepped into the room, his footsteps echoing despite his efforts to move quietly. The mannequin's eyes seemed to track his movement, an illusion created by the way glass caught and reflected light. He'd learned that in training. It was just an optical effect, nothing more. He reached for the journal, then stopped. This was evidence of something. He should photograph it first, document the scene. He pulled out his phone and snapped several pictures, the flash illuminating the figures in stark relief. In the harsh light, he could see details he'd missed before. The incredible craftsmanship of each face, the way each strand of hair had been individually placed, the subtle asymmetries that made them seem almost alive. One of the mannequins, a middle-aged woman in a 1960s house dress, had a small brass plate at her base. Margaret, 1968, Special Commission. Another, a young man in a soldier's uniform, Private Timothy Chen, 1971, Memorial Series. Chen. Marcus stared at the nameplate, an uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. It was a common enough name, but still, he photographed each mannequin and their nameplates, then finally turned his attention to the journal. He knew he shouldn't touch it, should report this to Diego, and let the day shift, deal with it. But curiosity won out. He picked up the journal and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was cramped but legible. May 15th, 1952. The factory opens today. 23 employees, 5,000 square feet of space and a dream. To create not mere mannequins but vessels. Containers for something more than cotton stuffing and plaster. The retailers want simple display figures. I will give them art. I will give them life. Marcus flipped through pages, scanning entries that grew increasingly strange. October 3rd, 1961. The glass eyes arrived from Munich today. Herr Kaufmann assures me they were crafted using the old methods, the techniques passed down through his family for generations. When I held them to the light, I swear I saw something looking back. February 18th, 1967. Margaret Tolland commissioned a memorial mannequin of herself today. Terminal diagnosis, she says. Wants something to remember her by. I told her I could do more than that. She laughed, but I saw the hope in her eyes. The same hope I see in all of them. The desire to persist, to remain, to never truly die. July 7th, 1971. The Chen family brought photographs of their son. Another soldier who won't be coming home. They want a memorial, but I see an opportunity. The new techniques are working. The hair from the deceased, the photographic overlays for the faces the plaster mixed with, other materials. Each one is better than the last, each one more real. Marcus's hands were shaking now. He flipped to the final entry. September 14th, 1973. They're complete. 12 vessels, 12 chances. Tonight we attempt the grand work. Margaret was first, of course. She's been waiting the longest. But the others are ready too. The detective who died in the line of duty. The teacher who succumbed to cancer. The young mother taken by childbirth. All of them waiting in the spaces I've prepared. The process is simple, really. We are all energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed, transferred, contained. The mannequins are more than vessels now. They're bridges, doorways. All they need is the proper invitation. If you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. Or perhaps gone right, depending on your perspective. Either way, remember, they're not trapped. They chose this. We all choose in the end what we're willing to become to avoid the final darkness. Look for the signs, the movements when no one is watching, the whispers in the empty halls, the feeling of being observed. They're not hauntings, they're greetings. They're trying to tell you they're still here, still waiting, still watching. A soft scraping sound made Marcus look up from the journal. The mannequins in the circle had moved, not dramatically but enough to notice. The woman with her hand raised had lowered it slightly. The man who'd been speaking had closed his mouth. The little girl's arms were at her sides, and they were all facing him now. Marcus backed toward the door, unable to look away from those glass eyes that seemed too aware, too knowing. His heel caught on something, and he stumbled, dropping the journal. It fell open to a page he hadn't seen one covered in what looked like names and dates. A list. At the bottom in fresher ink, Marcus Chen, 2024, night guard, pending. The door slammed shut. Marcus lunged for the handle, yanking at it desperately. Locked. He fumbled for his keys, his flashlight beams swinging wildly, creating dancing shadows that made the mannequins seem to move and shift. His radio crackled. "Marcus, you okay, man? I lost your signal for a minute there." Diego's voice tinny and distant. "I'm in C-19. Marcus gasped into the radio. "The door's locked. I can't." C-19. "What the hell are you doing in there? I'm coming." "Hurry." The mannequins stood perfectly still now, as if they'd never moved at all. But Marcus could feel them watching, waiting. The air in the room grew thick, oppressive. The medicinal smell grew stronger, mixed now with something else. Something organic and wrong. He heard footsteps in the corridor. Running. Then Diego's voice muffled by the door. "Marcus, stand back." The door burst open, Diego stumbling through with the master key in his hand. His eyes went wide as he took in the scene, the circle of mannequins, the journal on the floor. Marcus pressed against the wall. "Jesus Christ," Diego breathed. "We need to get out of here. Now." They ran. Through the corridor past the storage rooms with their silent occupants out of Zone C and into the covering walkway. They didn't stop until they were back in the security office, the door locked behind them. "What the fuck was that?" Marcus demanded, his hands still shaking. "What are those things?" Diego was at the computer pulling up files. "I told you C-19 was different. I've never seen them arranged like that before, but..." He turned the monitor toward Marcus. It showed an incident report from 1998. This isn't the first time. Look, the report detailed a night guard named Jennifer Walsh, who'd reported finding mannequins arranged in ritualistic patterns in C-19. She'd quit the next day. Another report from 2003 described mannequins that appeared to track movement and whisper in the dark. That guard had lasted 2 more weeks before leaving without notice. "Why doesn't the company do something about it?" Marcus asked. "Like what throwaway mannequins worth thousands of dollars each because the night guards get spooked. As far as management's concerned, nothing actually happens. No theft, no damage, no injuries, just scared employees who quit and get replaced." "But that journal..." "What journal?" Marcus pulled out his phone to show the photos, but the gallery was empty. Every picture he'd taken in C-19 was gone. "I had photos. I documented everything." Diego gave him a long look. "Electronics get weird in C-19. Another thing I probably should have mentioned. Cameras fail, phones glitch, radios cut out. It's why half the security cameras don't work in that zone." They sat in silence for a moment, the bank of monitors showing empty corridors and still figures throughout the factory. "So what do we do?" Marcus finally asked. "We finish our shift," Diego said. "We log that camera 47 is malfunctioning and needs maintenance. We don't mention C-19, and tomorrow night we stick to zones A and B unless absolutely necessary." "That's it. We just pretend nothing happened." "What happened?" "Marcus, you got locked in a room. Old building, faulty locks. Happens all the time." Diego's expression was carefully neutral. "Unless you want to file a report about moving mannequins and mysterious journals. See how that goes over with Raymond." Marcus knew he was right. Who would believe them? He'd barely believe it himself if he hadn't lived it. The rest of the shift passed in tense silence. Marcus didn't do his 5:30 patrol, and Diego didn't push him. When the day shift arrived, they handed over the keys and logs without mentioning the incident. As they walked to the parking lot, Diego finally spoke. Look, I know tonight was fucked up, but this job, it pays well the hours work for school, and most nights nothing happens. You just have to learn the rules. What rules? Stay out of C19. Don't touch the vintage mannequins. If you hear something, ignore it. If you see something move, look away and it'll stop. And never ever work alone on the anniversary. Anniversary of what? September 14th, the day Whitmore died. That's when it's worst. Last year, the guard who worked that night said every mannequin in the building turned to watch him pass. Said he could hear them whispering his name. Marcus reached his car keys in hand. Did he quit? No, he just requested different nights. Like I said, you learn to live with it. Diego paused by his own vehicle. So, you coming back tomorrow? Marcus thought about the mannequins in their circle, about glass eyes, that saw too much about his name in fresh ink, in a journal that shouldn't exist. He thought about his student loans, his rent, the job market, that had taken him months to navigate. Yeah, he said finally, I'll be back. But as he drove home through the dawn light, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake. That some choices once made couldn't be taken back. That somewhere in Zone C, 12 figures stood in a circle waiting patiently for his return. The bride mannequin watched him from Zone B, still in her misplaced position among the modern figures. When he'd passed her on his way out, he could have sworn she was smiling. Chapter 3. The Pattern. 2 weeks passed without major incident. Marcus had developed a routine that kept him out of Zone C, entirely focusing his patrols on the manufacturing and finishing areas. Diego never mentioned their night in room C19, and Marcus didn't bring it up. They fell into a comfortable rhythm of shared shifts, trading off monitor duty and patrols, pretending that nothing strange had happened. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the journal, about the names and dates, about his own name written in fresh ink. He'd started researching the factory's history during his off hours, digging through newspaper archives and public records. What he found disturbed him more than the moving mannequins. Arthur Whitmore had indeed died in 1973, but the circumstances were stranger than Diego had let on. The police report mentioned that Whitmore's body had been found in an unusual position, and that several mannequins had to be moved before paramedics could reach him. The coroner had noted irregularities in the condition of the body, but hadn't elaborated. More interesting were the patterns that emerged when Marcus cross-referenced the names from the journal with death records. Margaret Tolland had died of cancer in 1967, just months after commissioning her memorial mannequin. Private Timothy Chen, no relation Marcus had verified, had been killed in Vietnam in 1971. Each name in the journal corresponded to someone who had died within a year of their mannequin being created. But here's what made Marcus's skin crawl. Every few years, someone associated with the factory would die under unusual circumstances. Always someone who'd had extended contact with the vintage collection. A cleaning woman in 1981 who'd had a heart attack in Zone C. A maintenance worker in 1995 who'd fallen from a ladder while working on the lights in the vintage storage area. A day shift supervisor in 2008 who'd been found dead in his office after staying late to catalogue the Whitmore collection. Each death was explainable. Natural causes accidents, nothing suspicious, according to the official records. But Marcus had noticed something else. In the employee records he'd managed to access through a friend who worked in HR at another company, each of these deceased employees had reported disturbances in the weeks before their deaths. Mannequins moving, whispers in empty rooms, the feeling of being watched, just like what he'd been experiencing. It was a Thursday night, 3 weeks into his employment, when things escalated. Marcus was at the monitor desk while Diego did the 3:30 a.m. patrol. He watched his partner's progress through the cameras, tracking the beam of Diego's flashlight as it moved through Zone A. Then he noticed something odd on one of the Zone B monitors. A figure in white standing in an aisle where no mannequin should be. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting the camera angle. It was the bride. But she wasn't in her usual spot in row 15. She was in row 8, near the children's clothing section. Marcus grabbed his radio. Diego, you seeing this? Seeing what? Diego's voice crackled back. Check row 15. Marcus said, though he already knew what Diego would find. Sure enough, when Diego reached the formal wear section, there she stood. The bride mannequin in her elaborate dress positioned exactly as she'd always been. "She's here," Diego confirmed, but his voice was strained. "Right where she should be." Marcus saved the screenshot he'd taken. Unlike the photos from C-19, this one remained in his phone. Proof that he wasn't imagining things. When Diego returned to the security office, he was pale and sweating despite the cool night air. "I need to tell you something," Diego said, slumping into his chair. "About why the last night guard quit." Marcus waited, saying nothing. His name was Tom Morrison. Good Guy Reliable worked here for almost 2 years. He started reporting stuff like this about 6 months ago. Mannequins moving between cameras. Always the vintage ones. Always that bride. Diego rubbed his face with both hands. Management told him it was stress, suggested he take some time off, but Tom was convinced something was happening. He started documenting everything, keeping a log of every movement, every anomaly. What happened to him? He became obsessed, started coming in on his nights off trying to catch them in the act. He set up his own cameras, motion detectors, the works. Then one night, Diego paused, seeming to wrestle with whether to continue. One night he said he saw her walking. The bride, walking down the aisle like she was heading up to an altar. He had it on video, he said. Showed it to me the next morning. And the video showed nothing, just an empty aisle. But Tom swore she was there, said she'd looked right at the camera, right at him, and smiled. Diego met Marcus's eyes. He quit that day. Didn't even finish out the week. Last I heard, he'd left town entirely. They sat in silence watching the monitors. The factory seemed quieter than usual, as if it too was holding its breath. "There's more," Diego continued. "I did some digging after Tom left. That bride mannequin, she wasn't part of the original Whitmore collection. She appeared in 1987, no record of where she came from. Just showed up one day in the inventory. And here's the really fucked up part, she matches the description of a woman who went missing that same year. Laura Sanderson, supposed to get married at St. Mary's downtown, never showed up to her wedding, never seen again." Marcus felt cold despite the warmth of the security office. "You think?" "I don't think anything," Diego said quickly. "I just work here. But I'll tell you what Tom told me before he left. He said the mannequins aren't just mannequins. They're waiting for something. And the bride. She's looking for someone. Maybe she found Tom. Maybe that's why he ran." The rest of the shift passed without incident, but Marcus couldn't concentrate on anything except the bride's still form on monitor 15. As dawn approached and their shift ended, he made a decision. "I'm going to look into this," he told Diego as they walked to their cars. "The history, the missing persons, all of it." Diego grabbed his arm. "Don't. I'm serious, Marcus. Just do your job and go home. Don't end up like Tom." But Marcus couldn't let it go. Over the next week, he dove deeper into his research. He found more patterns, more connections. The mannequins that moved most often, the bride, an elderly man in a brown suit, a teenage girl in a 1970s disco outfit, all resembled people who'd gone missing in Millbrook over the decades. People who'd had some connection to the factory, however tenuous. He also found something else. In the months before Whitmore's death, he'd been investigating something he called the preservation process. His notes archived at the local historical society hinted at techniques beyond conventional taxidermy or embalming. He'd been in correspondence with practitioners of what he termed alternative preservation methods from around the world. The last entry, dated just days before his death, mentioned a breakthrough. The vessel need not be empty if the original occupant can be relocated. Marcus was so absorbed in his research that he almost missed the pattern happening in real time. It started small. A maintenance worker mentioned feeling dizzy in Zone C. A cleaner reported hearing voices when she was alone in the building. The day shift supervisor complained of headaches that only occurred at work. Then Marcus checked the duty roster and felt his blood turn to ice. All of these people had one thing in common: they'd all been assigned to work on September 14th. The anniversary of Whitmore's death. That was 3 days away. Marcus tried to switch shifts, but the schedule was locked. He tried calling in sick in advance, but Raymond shut him down. "You can't call in sick for a shift that hasn't happened yet, Chen. You show up or you're fired." The night of September 13th. Marcus arrived at work to find the parking lot fuller than usual. 3 security guards instead of 2, plus Raymond himself. Special circumstances, Raymond explained, looking uncomfortable. Corporate always wants extra coverage on the anniversary. Some bullshit about respecting the founder's memory. Just stick together, do your rounds in pairs, and we'll get through it. But as midnight approached and September 14th began, Marcus knew it wouldn't be that simple. The lights throughout the factory seemed dimmer, the shadows deeper, and on every monitor in every zone, the mannequins stood perfectly still, too still, like they were waiting for something. In Zone B, the bride had moved again. This time she stood at the end of the main aisle facing the security office. Her dress seemed whiter in the darkness, almost luminous. And for the first time since he'd started working at Whitmore and Associates, Marcus heard the sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The soft rustle of fabric as somewhere in the factory. Something began to walk. Chapter 4, The Anniversary. September 14th, 12:01 a.m. The factory felt different the moment the date changed. It wasn't anything Marcus could quantify. The temperature read the same on the thermostat. The lights hummed at their usual frequency. The ventilation system maintained its regular rhythm. But the air itself seemed heavier, charged with a potential that made his skin prickle. Raymond had set up a command post in the security office, spreading out old floor plans and emergency procedures across the desk. The other guard he'd brought in was a veteran named Bill Hutchinson, a grizzled ex-cop in his 60s, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "All right, listen up." Raymond announced, his usual casual demeanor replaced by something harder. "I've been through 5 of these anniversaries. They're always weird, but if we follow protocol, we get through them. Rules for tonight: nobody goes anywhere alone. Patrols are every 30 minutes instead of hourly. You see anything unusual, you report it immediately. Don't investigate. Don't try to be a hero. Just report and fall back." "What exactly are we expecting?" Marcus asked. Raymond and Bill exchanged a look. "Power fluctuations," Raymond said finally. "Equipment malfunctions. Sometimes the employees who work late report disturbances. Trick is not to engage. Whatever you see or hear, you observe and report. That's it." Diego caught Marcus's eye and shook his head slightly. A warning to keep quiet about what they'd experienced in C-19. "Bill and I will take zones A and B," Raymond continued. "Chen and Vasquez, you've got C. I know it's not ideal, but you two know that area best." Marcus's heart sank. Zone C on the anniversary. It felt like a trap closing around him. They geared up with extra flashlights, fresh batteries, and portable radios in addition to their standard equipment. As they prepared to head out for the first patrol, Bill pulled Marcus aside. "Kid, let me give you some advice," he said in a low voice. "I worked the force for 30 years. Saw a lot of shit that didn't make the reports. This place, it's wrong. Has been since Whitmore died. Maybe before. You see something tonight that shouldn't be possible. You trust your gut, not your eyes. And whatever you do, don't let them separate you from your partner." "Them!" Bill's jaw tightened. "The plastic people. They're different tonight. Active, like they're running on a different frequency. Stay alert." The first patrol was uneventful. Marcus and Diego walked through Zone C together, their flashlight beams creating a cone of safety in the oppressive darkness. The vintage mannequins stood in their usual positions, though Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were holding themselves still with effort like children playing statue. Camera 47 was still malfunctioning. As they passed beneath it, Diego whispered, "Notice anything different?" Marcus looked around. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then he realized what Diego meant. The dust. Every surface in Zone C typically had a fine layer of dust disturbed only by their nightly patrols. But tonight, the dust showed signs of disturbance everywhere. Handprints on door frames, drag marks on the floor, as if things had been moving before they arrived. They completed their circuit and returned to find Raymond and Bill looking shaken. Raymond's shirt was soaked with sweat and Bill kept checking over his shoulder. "Zone B," Raymond said without preamble. "The mannequins are facing the wrong way. All of them." "What do you mean?" Diego asked. "Every single figure in the finishing area is facing the walls, backs to the aisles. We've been doing this job for decades and we've never seen anything like it. Marcus pulled up the Zone B cameras on the monitors. Raymond was right. Hundreds of mannequins all turned away from the cameras' faces hidden. It was deeply unsettling, like they were deliberately avoiding being watched. "Should we turn them back?" Marcus suggested. "No." Raymond's response was immediate and forceful. "We don't touch them tonight. We observe and report." The second patrol at 12:30 revealed new strangeness. The bride mannequin was no longer in Zone B at all. They found her in the covered walkway between buildings, standing directly in their path. Her dress pooled around her feet, and her painted eyes seemed to follow them as they carefully edged past. "How?" Diego breathed. "How did she get here?" Marcus had no answer. The walkway had no other entrances. She would have had to pass through multiple locked doors to reach this position. They continued to Zone C, where they discovered that the door to room C19 was open again. Not just cracked this time, but standing wide. The darkness beyond seemed to pulse with invitation. "We have to check it," Marcus said, though every instinct screamed at him to run. "Together," Diego agreed. On three. They entered the room as one, flashlights raised. The circle of mannequins remained, but they'd changed position. Instead of facing inward, they now faced the door as if they'd been waiting. The chair in the center was no longer empty. A figure sat there, hunched forward, hands clasped in its lap. It wore a mouldering suit that might have been fashionable in the 1970s. As their lights hit it, the figure raised its head. It was a mannequin, but one Marcus hadn't seen before. Its face was different from the others, more detailed, more specific, photographic in its realism, and Marcus recognized it from the newspaper articles he'd found. It was Arthur Whitmore, or a perfect replica of him. The mannequin's mouth was open slightly, and as they watched, frozen in horror, a sound emerged. Not from the figure itself, but from all around them. A whisper that seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the very air. Almost complete. Then the lights went out. Not just in C19, but throughout the entire facility. Their flashlights died simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. Marcus grabbed for Diego, found his arm. "The door!" They stumbled backward, guided by memory and desperation. Behind them, the whispers grew louder, multiplying. Not one voice, but dozens, all speaking at once. "Join us!" "The vessels are ready. The preservation continues. You've been chosen." They burst through the doorway and into the corridor where emergency lighting provided blessed illumination. Their flashlights flickered back to life. From C19 came the sound of movement, heavy footsteps, the scrape of chair legs, the rustle of old fabric. "Run," Diego gasped. They ran. Through Zone C, past storage rooms where faces pressed against windows from the inside. Past mannequins that turned their heads to track their passage. The bride stood at the exit, arms outstretched as if to embrace them. They dodged around her and into the walkway. The radio crackled. Raymond's voice tight with panic. "All units return to security immediately. Emergency Protocol 7. Repeat Emergency Protocol 7. Marcus didn't know what Protocol 7 was, but the fear in Raymond's voice was unmistakable. They sprinted through Zone B, where the mannequins had turned again, all facing the center aisle, now creating a gauntlet of watching eyes. Some had moved closer to the path, forcing Marcus and Diego to weave between them. They reached Zone A to find chaos. Every machine on the manufacturing floor had activated. Mechanical arms swung through empty air. Conveyor belts carried phantom loads. The presses that shaped fiberglass bodies opened and closed in rhythm, like hungry mouths. Raymond and Bill were backed against the security office door, weapons drawn. Not guns. Whitmore and Associates didn't authorize lethal weapons, but heavy-duty tasers that seemed pathetically inadequate against what they faced. The mannequins were moving. Not all of them, but enough. They walked with jerky, unnatural gaits like marionettes operated by inexperienced puppeteers. They emerged from every zone, converging on the security office. Men in business suits, women in evening wear, children in school uniforms, all moving with the same horrible purpose. And leading them was the bride, her dress no longer white, but stained with something dark. She moved differently from the others, more fluidly, more human. When she spoke, her painted lips didn't move, but the voice was clear. "He's waited so long. The collection must be completed. The preservation must continue. Inside, Raymond shouted, yanking open the office door. They tumbled in, slamming the door behind them. Raymond threw every lock, then dragged a filing cabinet in front of it. Through the windows, they could see the mannequins surrounding the office. They didn't attack, didn't try to break in. They just stood there watching. "What the fuck is Protocol 7? Diego demanded. "Lock down and wait for dawn," Bill said, checking his watch. 5.5 hours. We just have to last 5.5 hours. This has happened before. Marcus couldn't keep the accusation out of his voice. "Not like this," Raymond admitted. "Never this many, never this organized." The lights flickered. On the monitors, Marcus could see more mannequins throughout the factory, all moving toward their position. But there was something else. In Zone C, the cameras that had been malfunctioning for weeks suddenly came online. They showed room C19, where the Whitmore mannequin still sat in its chair. But it wasn't alone. Translucent figures surrounded it, barely visible on the grainy feed. Human shapes, but insubstantial. Ghosts, Marcus realized with a chill. The original owners of the mannequins. Margaret Tolland, Private Timothy Chen, all the others whose names were in the journal. They seemed to be performing some kind of ritual, moving in patterns around the seated figure. And with each pass, the Whitmore mannequin seemed more solid, more real. "He's coming back," Marcus breathed. "That's what this is about." Whitmore found a way to preserve himself, to transfer his consciousness into a mannequin. But he needed more. More vessels, more souls to power the process. "That's insane," Raymond said, but his voice lacked conviction. On the monitor, the Whitmore mannequin stood. Even on the poor quality feed, they could see the difference. This wasn't the jerky movement of the others. This was smooth, natural human. It began to walk toward the camera, toward Zone C's exit, toward them. "We need to get out of here," Diego said. "Now! And go where—" Bill gestured at the windows. "They've got us surrounded." But Marcus was thinking about the journal, about the patterns he'd discovered. "The bride," he said suddenly. "She's the key. She wasn't part of Whitmore's original collection. She's looking for someone. What if she's looking for him?" "What are you talking about?" Raymond demanded. "Laura Sanderson, the woman who disappeared. What if she didn't run from her wedding? What if Whitmore took her? What if she's been trying to stop him all these years, moving through the factory, searching?" It was insane. But no more insane than mannequins walking, than ghosts performing rituals, than a dead man returning to life in a plastic body. On the monitors, the Whitmore mannequin had reached Zone B. The other mannequins parted before it, like subjects before a king. All except one. The bride stood in the center of the main aisle, blocking its path. For a long moment, they faced each other still as the statues they resembled. Then the bride raised her hand, pointing at the Whitmore figure. When she spoke, her voice carried even through the office walls, beautiful and terrible. "Arthur, my love, my murderer, did you think I would let you return?" The Whitmore mannequin recoiled. Around the security office, the watching figures stirred restlessly. The spell holding them seemed to waver. "She was his fiancée," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "Laura Sanderson was engaged to Arthur Whitmore. She discovered what he was doing, tried to stop him. And he made her into one of them," Diego finished. On the monitor, the confrontation continued. The bride advanced, and the Whitmore figure retreated. The other mannequins seemed caught between two imperatives, swaying in place. "This is our chance," Bill said, while they're distracted. But before they could move, the lights went out again. This time, they didn't come back. In the darkness, they heard the filing cabinets scrape across the floor, the door locks clicking open one by one, a whisper directly outside, "Time to choose. Join the collection willingly or—" The door swung open. In the faint light from the monitors, a figure stood silhouetted in the frame. Not a mannequin. Tom Morrison, the previous night guard. But his eyes were glass now. His skin had the sheen of polished plastic, and when he smiled, his face didn't quite move right. "Hello, boys," he said in a voice like rustling paper. "Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you about your future employment opportunities." Behind him, an army of plastic faces waited in the darkness. And somewhere in the factory, two figures in vintage clothing fought a battle that had been raging for 50 years. The preservation process was nearly complete. One way or another, the collection would grow tonight. Marcus gripped his flashlight like a weapon. and prepared to fight for more than just his life. He prepared to fight for his soul. Chapter 5. The Choosing. Tom Morrison stepped into the security office, his movements too smooth, too precise. Up close, Marcus could see the seams where his transformation wasn't quite complete lines along his jaw, where flesh met something else, a glassy quality to his skin that caught the light wrong. "I know what you're thinking," Tom said, his voice carrying an echo of its former humanity. "But it's not so bad. The fear goes away once you accept it. Once you understand what Mr. Whitmore is offering." "Offering?" Raymond backed against the monitors, his hand still clutching the taser. "He's a psychopath who turns people into mannequins." Tom tilted his head at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. "Preservation, continuation, immortality of a sort. Do you know what it's like, Raymond? To never age, never hunger, never feel pain, to be perfect forever." "You're not Tom anymore," Diego said. "You're just a thing wearing his face." Something flickered in Tom's glass eyes, perhaps a remnant of emotion or just a trick of the light. "I'm more Tom than I ever was. Distilled, purified. All the messy, weak human parts burned away." Behind him, more figures crowded the doorway. Marcus recognized some of them: the maintenance worker who died in 95, the cleaning woman from 81. All perfectly preserved, all moving with that same unnatural grace. On the monitors, the battle between the bride and Whitmore continued. They circled each other in Zone B, and where they passed, mannequins toppled and shattered. The bride's dress whipped around her like a living thing, and her voice rose in what might have been song or screaming. 50 years, Arthur, 50 years I've waited, 50 years I've watched you take them." The Whitmore figure responded, his voice carrying despite the distance. "You could have stood beside me, Laura. Could have been my queen in this new world. Instead, you chose resistance. And for what they come willingly in the end. They always do." "Not all of them," the bride Laura spat back. "Some of us remember what it means to be human." Tom stepped further into the office and the others followed. They fanned out, blocking any escape route. "Mr. Whitmore requests your presence," he said. "The anniversary demands new additions to the collection. You've been chosen." "Fuck that," Bill growled. He triggered his taser, sending twin probes into Tom's chest. Electricity arced across the plastic surface of his skin, but Tom merely looked down at the wires with mild interest. "That won't work," he said, plucking the probes free. "We don't have nervous systems anymore. No pain receptors, no fear response. It's quite liberating." Marcus's mind raced. There had to be a way out. In all his research, there must have been something. Then he remembered. The journal. Whitmore's own words. The vessels need not be empty if the original occupant can be relocated. "Where do you go?" he asked suddenly. "The real you, the human soul. Where does it go when the plastic takes over?" Tom paused, and for the first time uncertainty crossed his features. We're still here. We're trapped," said a new voice. The cleaning woman stepped forward, and her expression was different from Tom's, sadder, more aware. "We're passengers in our own bodies, watching through glass eyes as these things walk around wearing our faces." "Quiet!" Tom snapped, but cracks were appearing in his composure. "No," the cleaning woman continued. "They deserve to know. Whitmore promises preservation, but it's a lie. We're prisoners. The plastic copies us, learns us, then locks us away in a corner of our own minds. We scream and scream, but no sound comes out." Other figures in the doorway stirred restlessly. Marcus saw doubt spreading among them like a virus. "You can fight it," the cleaning woman said urgently. "In the moments of transfer, you can resist. I've been trying for 20 years to break free, to warn someone. The bride Laura, she managed it. She kept enough of herself to fight back. You can too if you're strong enough." Tom's hand shot out impossibly fast, gripping the cleaning woman's throat. "Enough!" His voice had dropped to something inhuman. Mr. Whitmore's will cannot be denied, but the damage was done. The unity of the Mannequin army was fracturing. Some stood firm, but others began to twitch and jerk as internal battles raged between plastic and soul. On the monitors, Laura had driven Whitmore back to Zone C. Her voice carried on the air. "You killed me on our wedding day. Murdered me in that room because I threatened to expose you. But you made a mistake, Arthur. You put too much of me into this vessel. Too much will, too much rage, too much love turned to hate. You were weak, Whitmore's voice responded. Human sentiment, human frailty. I offered you eternity. You offered me slavery. In the security office, the standoff continued. Tom still blocked the doorway, but his followers were in disarray. Some had collapsed caught between two imperatives. Others wandered away, lost in their own internal struggles. We need to help her, Marcus said suddenly. Laura. She's been fighting alone for 50 years. If we can tip the balance… How? Raymond demanded. Marcus thought about the journal, about the ritual, about the patterns he'd observed. The circle in C19. That's where he draws his power. If we can disrupt it… You want us to go to the crazy ghost mannequin room? Diego's voice cracked. It's better than waiting here to be converted. Bill stepped forward, shouldering his useless taser. Kid's got a point. We go down fighting or we go down on our knees. I know which I prefer. Tom laughed, a sound like plastic scraping glass. You can't stop him. The preservation will be complete. The collection will… His words cut off as the lights throughout the factory suddenly blazed to life. Every bulb, every emergency light, every LED burned at maximum intensity. The glare was blinding, and in that moment of disorientation, Marcus moved. He grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from the desk and swung it like a club, connecting with Tom's head. There was a crack like breaking porcelain, and Tom staggered. More importantly, he moved aside. Go, go, go! They burst through the doorway, shoving past confused mannequins. The intense light seemed to disorient the plastic figures. Perhaps their glass eyes weren't designed for such brightness. Marcus led the way, muscle memory guiding him through the maze of aisles. In Zone B, they found devastation. Shattered mannequins littered the floor, casualties of the battle between Laura and Whitmore. The combatants themselves were nowhere to be seen, but a trail of broken figures led towards Zone C. They followed it, feet crunching on plastic shards and synthetic hair. Behind them, the sound of pursuit, dozens of feet moving in unnatural synchronization. Tom's voice rose above the noise. You only delay the inevitable. The walkway to Zone C was a gauntlet of reaching hands. Mannequins lined both sides, grasping at them as they passed. Diego cried out as fingers tangled in his hair, but Bill yanked him free. They stumbled through the entrance to find a war zone. Laura and Whitmore stood in the corridor outside C19, locked in what looked like an embrace, but was actually a death grip. Around them, the air itself seemed to ripple with energy. The vintage mannequins from the storage rooms had emerged, choosing sides in the conflict. They battered at each other with stiff limbs, faces frozen in permanent smiles as they fought. The room! Marcus shouted over the chaos. We have to get to the room! They fought their way through the melee. A mannequin in a Victorian dress swung at Raymond, who ducked and shoved it into the wall. Bill cleared a path with wide swings of his flashlight, sending heads rolling across the floor. The door to C19 stood open, pulsing with a sickly light. Inside, the circle of figures still stood, but they were active now. They swayed and chanted in a language that predated words, their voices creating a harmony that made Marcus's teeth ache. In the center, the chair was empty, but above it something was forming. A shape made of shadow and static, gradually taking on human features. Whitmore's true self pulling free from whatever dimension he'd hidden in for 50 years. The circle! Marcus yelled. Break the circle! They charged. Marcus tackled the nearest figure, Margaret Tolland, according to her nameplate. She was surprisingly heavy, and when she hit the ground, something like smoke poured from her mouth. A whisper of gratitude on the air, then she was still. The others followed suit, toppling the mannequins one by one. Each time that same smoke emerged, souls finally freed from their plastic prisons. The chanting faltered, the harmony breaking apart. No. Whitmore's voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere. The shadow above the chair writhed, trying to maintain cohesion. I will not be denied, not again. Laura appeared in the doorway, dragging Whitmore's mannequin form behind her. Both figures were damaged. Laura's dress was in tatters, one arm hanging at an impossible angle. Whitmore's mannequin was missing half its face, revealing hollow darkness beneath. Together, Arthur, she said, and her voice was almost gentle now. Just like we were meant to be. She hurled herself forward, carrying Whitmore's form into the center of the broken circle. They collided with the shadow above the chair, and the reaction was immediate and violent. Light exploded from the impact, not electric light, but something older and more primal. Marcus threw himself to the ground as waves of energy washed over him. He felt something try to enter him, to fill him up and push him out, but he held on to himself with desperate strength. The cleaning woman's words echoed, "You can fight it. You can resist." Around him, he heard his companions struggling with their own battles. Raymond cursing steadily. Bill reciting what sounded like a prayer. Diego calling for his mother in Spanish. Then as suddenly as it began, it was over. Marcus raised his head. The circle was broken, mannequin parts scattered across the floor. The chair had split down the middle, and in the center of the room, two figures lay intertwined. They looked human now. An elderly man in a moldering suit and a young woman in a wedding dress. Both were clearly dead, had been dead for decades, but their faces were peaceful. Laura's hand rested on Arthur's cheek, a gesture that might have been forgiveness or simple exhaustion. "Is it over?" Diego whispered. As if in answer, a great sigh seemed to run through the building. Throughout the factory, they heard the sound of falling plastic as mannequins collapsed where they stood. The lights flickered back to normal levels. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed on them all night lifted. They made their way back through the factory in silence, too exhausted and shell-shocked to speak. The mannequins were just mannequins again, lying in heaps where they'd fallen. Tom Morrison sat propped against a wall in Zone A, blinking slowly, looking confused but human. The glassy sheen was fading from his skin, the seams disappearing. "What? What happened?" he asked as they passed. "I remember. Did I quit? Why am I here?" "We'll explain later," Raymond said gruffly. "Just sit tight. Paramedics are coming." They'd called 911 from the security office reporting a gas leak and multiple casualties. It was the only explanation that might be believed. As they waited for help to arrive, Marcus looked at the monitors one last time. Zone C was still. Room C19's door had swung shut, and somehow he knew it would never open again. "You realize we can never tell anyone about this," Bill said. "They'd lock us up." "The company will cover it up," Raymond added. "They always do. Probably blame it on chemical exposure, give us all settlements to keep quiet." Marcus nodded, but he was thinking about Laura and Arthur lying together in that room. About love turned to obsession, preservation become prison, and the terrible price of trying to cheat death. "I quit," Diego announced. "Effective immediately. I don't care about the money. I'm done." "Same," Marcus agreed. Whatever Whitmore and Associates paid it wasn't worth this. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Soon, there would be questions, investigations, cover-ups. But for now, they sat in the pre-dawn quiet, four men who had faced the impossible and survived. Outside, the first hints of sunrise painted the sky. And throughout the factory, hundreds of mannequins stood frozen in the growing light, nothing more than plastic and fiberglass again. Or so they hoped. Epilogue 6 months later. Marcus Chen sat in his new apartment in Chicago, far from Indiana and its mannequin factories. He'd taken a job in IT security cameras and computers, but no plastic people. The settlement from Whitmore and Associates had been generous with only one condition: never speak publicly about the events of September 14th. He was scrolling through news feeds when an article caught his eye. Historic Whitmore Mannequin factory to be demolished. Millbrook Inn, the Whitmore and Associates manufacturing facility, a local landmark since 1952, is scheduled for demolition next month. The company cited structural concerns and plans to relocate operations to a modern facility in Texas. "It's the end of an era," said company spokesperson Patricia Vance, "but we're excited about our future direction." The demolition will include the famous Zone C building, which housed the company's vintage collection. These historic pieces will be donated to various fashion museums after careful restoration. Marcus closed the article. He'd kept in touch with Diego, who'd moved back to California to finish his degree. Raymond had retired early. Bill had returned to fishing and steadfastly refused to discuss that night with anyone. As for Tom Morrison, He disappeared again after being released from the hospital. The official report listed him as suffering from temporary chemical-induced psychosis. But Marcus had seen the fear in his eyes when he tried to remember what happened during his time as one of them. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "They're not destroying all of them. Check the auction listings. L." His blood ran cold. L. Laura. But that was impossible. He'd seen her body, seen her finally at rest. Against his better judgment, he searched for Whitmore estate auction listings. There it was. Select pieces from the Whitmore Vintage Collection. Private sale. The lots included various mannequins from different eras, but one listing made his heart stop. Lot 47. Bridal mannequin circa 1967. Exquisite detailing, real hair, glass eyes. Some restoration required. Note: buyer must arrange special shipping. Item must not be stored with other mannequins. The listing photo showed a familiar figure in a tattered white dress. Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Diego's number. "Hey man," Diego answered. "What's up?" "They're selling them," Marcus said. "The vintage mannequins. They're selling them to private collectors." Silence on the other end. Then, so what if it's not over? What if breaking the circle just freed them temporarily? What if... Stop. Diego's voice was firm. "Just stop. It's done. We survived. Let someone else worry about it." But after they hung up, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about it. Somewhere, collectors were bidding on pieces of the Whitmore collection, bringing them into their homes, their private galleries. And somewhere, a bride in a white dress waited. He closed his laptop and tried to focus on his new life. But that night he dreamed of glass eyes and plastic smiles of a voice whispering, "The preservation continues." When he woke, there was a wedding invitation on his nightstand that hadn't been there before. No names, no date, just an address in Millbrook, and 2 words in elegant script. "Join us." Marcus threw the invitation in the trash. But he couldn't throw away the knowledge that somewhere in storage units and private collections across the country, the Whitmore mannequins waited. Patient, still, watching. The factory might be demolished, but its legacy lived on in plastic and fiberglass, in glass eyes that saw too much in the space between preservation and prison. And late at night, when the world was quiet and still, Marcus sometimes heard it, the soft rustle of fabric, the whisper of synthetic hair, the symphony of shifting plastic that played on and on in the darkness. Some songs never truly end. They just wait for the next movement to begin. Final chapter, the wedding. Marcus tried to ignore the invitation. He really did. For 3 weeks, he went about his life in Chicago, working his IT job, meeting friends for drinks, pretending that everything was normal. But normal had become a performance, and he was a terrible actor. The dreams grew worse. Every night he found himself back in the factory, walking endless corridors lined with watching figures. Sometimes he was pursuing the bride. Sometimes she was pursuing him. Always he woke with the taste of dust and plastic in his mouth. More invitations came. He found them everywhere, slipped under his door, tucked into his mail, even once sitting on his desk at work. All identical, all impossible. His co-workers swore they hadn't seen anyone enter his office. Diego called him 2 weeks after the first invitation appeared. "I got one too," he said without preamble. "Raymond and Bill as well. What the hell is happening?" "I don't know." Marcus stared at the latest invitation which had appeared in his locked car. Maybe it's someone's sick joke. Former employees trying to mess with us. "You don't believe that." He didn't. The invitations felt real in a way that transcended paper and ink. They carried weight, presence, obligation. "I looked into that auction," Marcus admitted. Lot 47 was withdrawn at the last minute. No explanation. But I tracked down some of the other buyers. 3 of them reported incidents after receiving their mannequins. Strange movements, whispers, the usual. 2 returned the pieces. One hasn't been seen in a month. "Jesus!" Diego was quiet for a moment. "So what do? We don't go to Millbrook. We don't engage. We move on with our lives." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it was futile. The invitations weren't requests. They were summons. Raymond broke first. He called Marcus on a Thursday night, drunk and rambling. "I went back," he slurred. "Had to see." The factory's still standing, but it's empty. Except for Zone C. The doors welded shut now, but I could hear them in there, moving around, waiting. Raymond, where are you now? Motel, outside Millbrook. Can't leave. Every time I try, I end up back here. Roads all lead back. It's like a goddamn roach motel. The line went dead. Marcus tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. Bill vanished next. His daughter called Marcus. She'd found his number in her father's effects. Bill had left for a fishing trip and never returned. His truck was found on the highway, outside Millbrook, engine running, door open. No sign of Bill himself. By the time Halloween approached, Marcus and Diego were the only ones left. They'd tried everything, changing numbers, moving to new addresses, even attempting to fly out of the country. But the invitations found them anyway, and increasingly so did other things. Marcus woke one morning to find a mannequin hand on his pillow. Diego reported seeing the bride on his street corner, always just out of direct sight. The wedding date on the invitations finally appeared, October 31st, midnight. "We have to go," Diego said during their last phone call. "You know we do, otherwise they'll bring the wedding to us." Marcus wanted to argue, but he'd seen the news reports. Mannequins appearing in impossible places, a department store window display in Detroit, where the figures rearranged themselves nightly, a museum in Boston, where vintage mannequins were recorded walking the halls after dark. The preservation was spreading like a virus, and they were the antibodies, or maybe the intended hosts. On October 30th, Marcus drove to Millbrook. The highways seemed to contract around him, miles disappearing faster than they should. By sunset, he was pulling into the same parking lot where this had all began. The factory looked different in the dying light, older, hungrier. Most of the buildings were dark, but lights blazed in Zone C. Diego's car was already there. So were two others, Raymond's truck and Bill's sedan. Marcus found Diego standing at the entrance, staring at the door. It stood open, impossible, given what Raymond had said about it being welded shut. Music drifted from within, old-fashioned crackling, like a record player struggling with a warped disc. "They're in there," Diego said. "I saw them go in, Raymond and Bill, but they looked different." They entered together, flashlights cutting through the familiar darkness. The corridor had been transformed. White fabric draped the walls. Candles flickered in wall sconces that hadn't been there before. Rose petals littered the floor, though they crumbled to plastic at a touch. The storage rooms were empty, their doors standing open like missing teeth. All the mannequins had gathered elsewhere. Marcus and Diego followed the music, the trail of petals, the pull of inevitability. Room C19 had become a chapel. Mannequins filled makeshift pews, all facing forward. They wore their finest clothes suits and dresses from across 7 decades of fashion. At the altar stood two figures Marcus recognized with a chill, Raymond and Bill, dressed in identical black suits, their faces waxy and still. They were ushers now, or groomsmen, or perhaps just the latest additions to the wedding party. The music stopped. Every head turned toward the newcomers. "Finally," said a voice like honey poured over broken glass. "The witnesses have arrived." Laura stepped from behind a curtain that hadn't existed moments before. She wore a new dress, pristine white, untouched by time or conflict. Her face was perfect, more perfect than any mannequin's had a right to be. When she smiled, it reached her glass eyes. "Where's Whitmore?" Marcus demanded. "I thought you destroyed him." "Destroyed." Laura laughed, and it sounded almost human. "Oh, Marcus, you can't destroy love. You can't kill obsession. You can only transform it." She gestured to the altar where a figure in a vintage tuxedo stood waiting. Not Whitmore, or not the Whitmore Marcus remembered. This was younger, handsome in the way of old Hollywood stars. The face Laura must have fallen in love with before the madness took hold. "I kept him," she said simply. "Remade him, perfected him. Now he's exactly what I always wanted him to be. Devoted, obedient, eternal." The Whitmore figure smiled vacantly, beautifully empty. "But a wedding needs witnesses," Laura continued. "And you're part of our story now. You helped write the ending. It's only fitting you see it through." "We won't," Diego started, but his words cut off. His feet were moving without his permission, carrying him to a pew. Marcus felt the same pull, the same inexorable force. They sat among the mannequins, and Marcus realized with horror that he couldn't tell where plastic ended and flesh began. Were those real people scattered among the figures, or had the figures become real? The ceremony began. A mannequin priest spoke words in no language Marcus recognized. Laura and her hollow groom exchanged vows that sounded like ownership contracts. The congregation sat in perfect stillness, a captive audience for a romance that had curdled into something monstrous. Do you, Arthur, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in preservation and in plastic until the stars burn cold? The Whitmore figure nodded, movements puppet smooth. Do you, Laura, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to shape and to mould in life and in death forever and always? I do. Her voice carried 50 years of patient hatred, transformed into something worse than love. Then, by the power vested in me by forces that predate human memory, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. They kissed, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in the world. This wasn't a union, it was a consumption. Laura was devouring what remained of Whitmore, taking his power, his knowledge, his madness into herself. When they parted, the groom's face was blank as unused paper. Laura turned to face the congregation, and her smile was terrible. Thank you all for coming, but I'm afraid the reception requires a different sort of guest list. She raised her hand, and Marcus felt the change beginning. Not the violent transformation Tom Morrison had undergone, but something subtler. His skin felt tight. His joints stiffened. When he tried to speak, his jaw moved slowly, mechanically. No, he managed to croak. We stopped you. We broke the circle. You broke Whitmore's circle, Laura corrected. But I've had 50 years to perfect my own methods. Did you think I fought him just to save you? I fought him to replace him, to become him but better. And now, thanks to you, I have. Diego was already changing his skin, taking on that telltale sheen. Raymond and Bill stood at attention, fully converted. Around them, the mannequin congregation began to applaud with stiff, rhythmic movements. Marcus fought the transformation with every ounce of will he possessed. The cleaning woman's words echoed, "You can fight it, you can resist." But this was different from Whitmore's crude possession. This was seduction invitation, a gradual replacement that felt almost pleasant. Don't struggle, Laura advised. It's so much easier if you don't struggle. You'll be perfect forever. Part of my collection, part of our eternal wedding party. Through dimming vision, Marcus saw the truth. The wedding would never end. Laura would replay it forever, adding new guests, new witnesses, new dolls to her perfect ceremony. She'd become the very thing she'd fought against, but worse because she'd learned from Whitmore's mistakes. As consciousness faded, Marcus managed one last act of defiance. His stiffening fingers found his phone pressed the emergency button he'd programmed weeks ago. A signal went out not to 911, but to a different number. A failsafe he'd hoped never to use. Laura noticed, of course, but she only smiled, calling for help. How sweet. More guests for the celebration. Don't worry, Marcus. In my collection, everyone is welcome. Everyone is family. Everyone is forever. The transformation completed. Marcus stood movement smooth as silk and took his place in the eternal wedding party. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of consciousness remained trapped behind glass eyes, screaming silently as his body moved without him applauding as Laura kissed her hollow groom again and again. The music started once more. The ceremony began anew, and in the distance sirens wailed not police or paramedics but something else, something Marcus had set in motion. The wedding continued, perfect and terrible. But outside, Zone C demolition crews were already surrounding the building. Marcus's failsafe, if he didn't check in by midnight on Halloween, a gas leak would be reported, the kind that required immediate demolition to prevent catastrophe. Laura heard the machines starting up and laughed. Clever boy. But do you really think destroying this place will stop me? I'm not bound to the factory anymore. I'm free. We're all free to spread across the world, one perfect wedding at a time. She was right, of course. But as the wrecking balls began to swing, as the walls of Zone C crumbled, Marcus held on to one thought. At least the source would be gone. At least no more security guards would stumble into C-19. At least this chapter would end even if the story continued. The building came down in a roar of concrete and steel. But in the rubble among the broken mannequins and shattered glass, something stirred. Figures in white and black, pulling themselves free. A bride and groom eternal and unbreakable. And behind them, their wedding party, ready to carry the celebration to new venues. The preservation continued. The collection grew. And somewhere in the plastic shell that had been Marcus Chen, a soul watched in horror as his body walked away from the ruins, following his new mistress into the night. The last thing he saw before the ruins disappeared behind them was a sign half buried in debris. Whitmore and Associates, bringing life to retail since 1952. Now they would bring something else entirely, something that wore life's face but beat with a plastic heart. The night guard's job was over. The real work was just beginning. In shopping malls and department stores, in museums and private collections, mannequins stood a little straighter, smiled a little wider, waited a little more patiently. The symphony of shifting plastic played on, conducted by a bride who'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction, it was becoming the very thing you'd hated, only better at it. And in the silence between movements, if you listened carefully, you could hear it, the sound of glass eyes blinking, of plastic lips, whispering of a wedding march that would never, ever end. Welcome to the collection. Welcome to the family. Welcome to forever. The end, your phone. I'm sending you a screenshot. Marcus captured the image and sent it. A moment later, Diego swore over the radio. That's not possible. I walked past row 15 10 minutes ago. She was there. Well, she's in row 8 now. I'm heading over. Marcus watched through the cameras as Diego changed direction, moving quickly towards Zone B. He entered the finishing area, and the motion sensors triggered the lights. Marcus could see him clearly now, moving down the aisles, flashlights sweeping back and forth. Diego reached row 8, empty. He turned slowly, checking the surrounding areas. Marcus, there's nothing here. Marcus looked at the monitor. The bride was gone. He cycled through the other Zone B cameras, searching. There, row 15, right where she was supposed to be. Check.